Well, hello and a very warm welcome to another in our series of Choice Words videos where we get to speak to some of the key decision makers in the world of UK fund management, UK fund selection, UK fund research, find out what makes them tick. I'm Julian Marr, I'm Editorial Director of Wealthwise Media, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Simon Ever-Cook, who is the founder and manager of the Downing Fox multi-asset range of funds. Hello, Simon.
Hello, delighted to be here.
Oh, thrilled you are here. Quite thrilled I actually got your job title more or less right as well, so there we go.
You nailed it, well done.
Thank you.
Full points.
I've high point already. Let's jump into my first question. Set the scene. Think about the current investment outlook. What most excites you? What worries you?
Right, so we're obviously filming this mid-March 2025. I think it's important to say that because the most exciting thing for me currently is that I'm running a equity portfolio. If we just look at the equities, that consists of heavily contrarian, non-mega cap US equities, and that stuff is tanking. So that's very exciting for me because we're finally seeing this thing happen that I've been talking about for the last couple of years non-stop. We saw it happen in 22, but we're seeing it happen now. So that's quite exciting because I think, longer term, what's exciting in markets is the fact that there's a lot of hand-wringing about where can you invest, everything looks expensive or dangerous. Actually, when you look at equity markets and you get away from those US mega caps and their massive impact on an index, there's tons of good stuff out there. There are massive returns to be made from UK equities, UK small cap, Europe, Asia, emerging markets, Japan. There is tons of stuff out there, but all of a sudden it feels like people might start looking at that again and forgetting about the Magnificent Seven and Nvidia and all that type of stuff. So that is definitely the most exciting thing. In terms of what is the most frightening thing, I guess maybe that comes with a bear market attached, possibly might be concerning. Now, I'm confident enough that the stuff that we own will hold up well enough. If you go back to 2000, you look at what happened in that bear market and actually the likes of an Aberforth, which is UK small cap value, or the likes of an Anthony Bolton, so Fidelity UK Special Sits, which was all cap UK, but contrarian, that stuff actually made money in that bear market. So I feel if you're off the beaten track, you can do well, but no one enjoys a bear market. So that's the thing that maybe concerns me a little bit at the moment, is that we get what we want, but it comes wrapped up in a fairly nasty wrapping paper.
Great start. And since you timed this as mid-March, I think that's a very clever thing to do in the context of that answer. If you're watching this in mid-April, I apologise, we've got a few of these before, we try to do them in order. If you're watching this in mid-May, we just dropped the ball, I'm sorry, but I'll try. I'm now incentivised to get this out even earlier than I would otherwise have. That set the macro scene. On a more individual level then, you touched on it a little bit, but what do you look most for in an individual investment and what do you see as red flags?
So as a fund selector, we are proudly all active, certainly on the equity front anyway, and the more active the better. So if you look in our equity components, our 100% equity fund, you will find only the most active fund managers. We are not interested in anything that is passive. We are not interested in anything or anyone who is aping passive. So the first red flag has to be someone who is closet tracking the index. So we do a lot of work on finding people who we think are just ploughing their own furrow. If they are a value manager, we want them doing pure value. If they were a growth manager, we want them doing pure growth. So that's probably the first thing that we want to be looking for. We want trustworthy individuals. So we do have, if you'll pardon my French, a no arsehole rule in our fund selection. So
very fluent.
Thank you. We want people who we're going to work with and that we can trust. Again, when it's all hitting the fan and things are going badly or maybe they're underperforming, you want to know that this person is at least a trustworthy individual. So that's up there. I guess maybe more esoterically, we don't particularly like macro managers, not in terms of our equity fund managers. We do like bottom-up stock pickers. And I think when you look at the greats over the years, the Anthony Bolton we already mentioned, but the Warren Buffetts, Peter Lynch, that's what they did. That was what their edge was. They just found amazing companies and they made sure they weren't overpaying for them. That's all we want. We don't try and overcomplicate it by trying to find people who are reinventing the wheel. So I think that's probably, quite a few of the things that we're after and a couple of red flags in there. Hopefully that answers it.
Absolutely does. Thank you for that. To what degree should professional investors be thinking beyond so-called traditional investments into the wonderful world of alternatives?
So if you classify traditional as equity, bond, cash,
Draw the line there.
you'll draw the line. Maybe I'd put gold
Okay.
and property in there. You know, they've been around a long time. Then I think you don't need to look beyond those.
Okay.
So, I mean, within our own funds, we basically only hold equities, cash, government bonds. I do see the point of gold and I do see the point of property. I have what you might call a dishwasher philosophy on assets, and I borrow this from Rory Sutherland, who wrote the excellent book Alchemy. He talks about if you want to make every utensil in your kitchen dishwasher proof, there are two ways you can do that. One is you can go around and try and look at all the labels in shops and try and buy a load of stuff that's dishwasher proof, but you're almost guaranteed to find that a few things you bought are not dishwasher proof. His alternative way of doing it is say, look, if you want to make everything in your kitchen dishwasher proof, just run everything through the dishwasher for a year. Only the stuff that survives will therefore be dishwasher proof. And that is exactly my view on asset classes. All of the classics have been through so many cycles, you know, dishwasher cycles or economic cycles or cycles of war, that I think you can trust them and know that they are still going to be an asset class in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 50 years' time. Some of the newer things I'm not so sure about, and some of the other things, you know, when you look at some of the alternative assets, I think they're basically equities in disguise anyway. If you're buying an investment trust that buys, I don't know, song rights, that might be a perfectly good asset, but to me, it behaves like an equity, so it's an equity. So yeah, skeptical is maybe too harsh a word on it, but I am pretty old school on the asset front.
Excellent. Let's get into client communications. You are good at this. I can safely say you wrote, for me, I'm not sure when you were at Premier Miton, you wrote for 3 years when you were when I was editing Professional Advisor. Thank you very much. I'm not even sure you knew doing that, but it was great.
I know enjoyed it all. Yeah.
There you go. Then you got your blogs, you've got the silver bullets, and all these different things you do. So what drives your approach to client communications? And also because I know this is something you're very good on, at least because we're quoting you in one of the pieces we have on Wealthwise, the idea of the unheroic journey. Maybe we can talk into that. Just keeping clients involved in the whole process of investments, so they actually benefit from exposure rather than getting in at the wrong time, getting out at the wrong time.
It's a great question, and there are so many things. I think thing number one is keep it simple. I think the moment you find yourself prevaricating, example given, into longer words and making things more complicated, you're probably giving yourself away as you don't really understand that. I think when you understand a subject is the point when you can explain it in very simple terms and make that understood to someone who didn't understand it before. So keep it simple. I think take it from the point of view of your client. This is something I am still learning today. I think if there's one thing I have been guilty of in the past with stuff I've written, is that I've written about stuff that interests me. I think that's a really good thing to do. But in doing that, I have possibly attracted more competitors to read my work than I have clients. So now I'm trying to refine what I write to think about, okay, this interests me, but why does this matter to an advisor, or why does it matter to an advisor's client? It's a nice little thing to add on, and I just think it helps again to see it through their lens and to understand what is worrying them. Can we help them to in some way mitigate that by talking about it? Now, you mentioned the hero's journey there. That's another device that I like to use. I mean, happily enough for me, I seem to be reasonably good at picking analogies out of there. You've already had a dishwasher thrown in for somewhere. I think that really helps, particularly in our world where everything is non-tangible. You can't see what we do, you can only describe it. So if you can find some way of pinning that onto something that people understand, then so much the better for it. So the heroic journey thing, why I think when I came up with that analogy, when the penny dropped, was because if there is a problem with the way that people think about money, it's potentially that they don't want surprises. So people do want an investment that looks a little bit like how the market's moving. Not so much when everything's going well, but definitely when markets are tanking. You don't want to be in the product that is dropping by 50% when the market's dropping by 25%. And you need to be aware of that. That's what clients get upset about. For advisors, that's the thing that causes them to have calls from clients, advisors getting really upset. So the heroic journey for us is that fund managers, generally the very best fund managers, are on that heroic journey. And what I mean by that is they will have periods when they are going through a trough. Just, heroic journey, just as a reminder to go back a little bit, is the template that authors use to make their stories more exciting. So anything from Homer's Odyssey through to Star Wars all follows the same path. And it's got to be dramatic. And I think most amazing fund managers, Woodford, Peter Lynch, Bolton, have all had years when they've looked incredibly heroic, but they've all had years in the trough when they've been very close to kind of almost career death, but they've come through that. Now that's great, and they're trained for that. But the client, the doctor, the nurse, the teacher, they are not trained for that. They are trained for their own everyday life. They don't need heroics as far as fund management is concerned. So the whole point of Downing Fox is that we find these heroic fund managers, because I think they're the only ones who are going to make you excess returns over time. But crucially, we find different managers who are on different journeys at different times. And the point being that while one's going through a trough, you've got another one who's going through a heroic moment. And we're seeing that at the moment. We have got fund managers in the growth space who've had a horrible month over the last month. We've got managers in the value space who are actually going up while markets are going down. So we're finding that we're very much reducing volatility, and that's got to be good for advisors and their clients, because you just don't want them having that horrible, horrible year, even if over 10 years they make a lot of money.
Excellent communication, love that. And in particular, Homer's Odyssey and Star Wars, two of my absolute favourite things. So they're really brilliant. Two different sides.
Hitting all the right notes.
You are, absolutely. Yeah. One minute you're destroying the Death Star, another minute you're having your hand cut off by your father. It's,
absolutely, yeah.
That's there we go. That's Star Wars, not the Odyssey. Maybe the second one. Anyway,
well, the Odyssey would have been the better for it, I think.
Yeah. More personal question then. What was your path into investment? If you hadn't taken it in Parallel Universe, what would you be doing now?
So the path into investment was pretty random. I did economics at university. I don't know why I did economics at university. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. My father was in accountancy, so I guess I thought I'd end up in finance somewhere. I then got a job at Fidelity, but it was nothing special at Fidelity. I wasn't on the graduate scheme or anything. It was just local to where I happened to live. I quite enjoyed it. I did reasonably well at it. And I was so I then moved to Rothschild and I did some time there. But if I did one mistake, is that I was trying to focus on making as much money as possible, not focusing on actually doing what I wanted to do and what I enjoyed. The irony of that was I ended up doing something I didn't enjoy and I didn't make very much money from doing it. So I was kind of failing on both sides. So there was a point in about 2003 when I woke up and just thought, look, if I'm not going to make a lot of money, I may as well at least focus on doing something that I really enjoy doing and I love. And so I thought at that point, right, I'm going to pivot to writing. And I'm going to start with writing about financial affairs and financial goings on, and then if that takes me into another field of writing, then great, that's the path I'm going to follow. And as soon as I did that, there's a thing called a halo effect, where if you're doing something well, in this case writing, people think and assume that you are good at other things that are related to that. So by this time I joined Premier. I joined as their investment communications person, joined David Hambidge's team, and I'd been there for 6 or 7 months, and one of the fund managers there left. And David Hambidge offered me the job of becoming a fund manager at Premier, and obviously I just grabbed it. I thought, great, yeah, I'm going to take that opportunity. And I've just loved it ever since. Luckily for me, the halo effect proved to actually be true in this case. It was something I proved to be quite good at, but I just was able to attack it and I loved it, and it was something I was able to focus on. And so that was my unconventional route to where I am today. I think the good thing about having had that unconventional route is all the stuff I learned on the way to doing that. About writing, about speaking to people, about all the various different jobs I had in that 10 years before the role at Premier now come into play, because I've had a more rounded kind of upbringing, if you like. Upbringing, I mean ages 21 to 29. And those things now play in. So in the fund management world, I can not just do fund management, I can do some of the other bits around it, which when you look at a manager like Warren Buffett, he's a great fund manager because he's great at investing, but he's also a great fund manager because he's able to bring people on that journey with him by explaining what's going on.
And in the alternative, you remained a writer.
Well, yeah, I suppose I was heading towards writing. My ambition in life from a very young age was to be a movie director. I doubt I would have made it that far because that's quite a tough job to get into. But yes, somewhere in writing would have been, I hope, where I would have ended up.
Somewhere between Homer and Star Wars. Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
You mentioned mistakes, but that I'm not sure it was necessarily, but I see where you're going. But in terms of investment mistakes, what's the biggest one you're prepared to admit to, and what did you learn from it, if anything?
Yeah, there's been quite a few over the years. I think probably the biggest is, we had a very successful run at Premier Mighton. We won lots of awards and we raised a lot of money and had very, very good performance. But through all of that time, we had a massive underweight to US equities in a time when US equities were killing it. The reason we did well is because we had very good fund selection, and even our Asian managers were outperforming the US equivalent because they were that good at what they were doing. That was a mistake. I think at the time we were very much valuation driven and valuation only. So we looked at a simple measure like CAPE, so long-term price earnings ratios, and said US is more expensive than everywhere else, so don't hold the US, do hold everywhere else. I think that, with the benefit of hindsight, was naive. It was naive for two reasons: because you should pay more for a high quality thing, be that a country or an equity, and the US is undeniably has the best companies on the planet. There are a few who can compete with US companies, but by and large there are more there. I think what we also missed was the fact that the world can change every now and again. So having put this view in place in 2006, 2007, we then missed the very obvious thing that the iPhone had been launched, and that changed the world entirely. The way that we all now operate has been changed by that fact. It was 2008. We should at that point have spotted the fact that something like Google or even Microsoft coming back deserved to be massive companies with network effects. So I think we were far, far too early to the point of being wrong. So I do look back on that. It was a mistake we got away with, thankfully, but it's one that I learned a lot from.
Very good. Yes, I think I was predicting the crisis for bonds for a good sort of 8 years in a row before I got it really right.
Yeah, that's the thing. These things could take forever to come about. And sometimes they come quick, sometimes they can take a lifetime.
I think, as far as I can see, I was the first person to use the phrase Bondmageddon, but by the time it actually became true,
and it certainly felt like that at the time, for sure.
Rapidly becoming everyone's favourite question on this series. What's the strangest thing you've ever seen or done outside of work?
So I've been racking my brains over this. I think that the strangest thing I've ever done would be a swimming with dolphins experience in New Zealand. Now that sounds quite idyllic. When I say that, you probably picture blue waters and the lovely kind of bottlenose dolphins and swimming. It was nothing like that. The whole experience was almost like an SBS type deployment. So we got out of bed at like 4 a.m. in coldest New Zealand. We were dressed up in frogman suits, proper thick wetsuits. And we were kind of herded onto the back of this boat. We were kind of jetted out into the sea in near darkness. And as soon as they found a pod of dolphins, they sounded an alarm and everyone was shoved off the back, and it was swim as fast as you can and you might get involved, you might see a dolphin or two. And so, we did finally get to see some dolphins. It wasn't anything like the experience I imagined it to be. And at one point I even had a seal come up and swim around me as well. So it was lovely. But when you sort of took a step back and looked at where you were and what was going on, it was a very, very strange experience. So I think that's probably, of all the things I can mention in the world of strange, that's probably up there.
It's an awful lot of work just to have some fun, isn't it? Build a special memory.
But memorable.
Well, there is that, yes. Okay, just quick pivot to what's the best and worst case scenarios for the future of wealth in this country?
I'm always tempted when someone asks me for a best case or a worst case to go wildly over the top with the worst case, because the worst case obviously is that a meteor strikes the world and we all die. So if we start from there, and under those circumstances, by the way, our performance will be no better than average. So let's not. Yeah. So I don't claim to have any kind of answer to that, but let's take it up to maybe a more realistic range. I think the worst case is that we carry on the path that we've been going, which is that maybe stuff is getting strangled from my perspective. It seems to be that the powers that be favour the big and the powerful, and they are doing everything they can to help the big and the powerful, be that politicians or regulators. They seem to believe that fewer big things are good. And I have the opposite view. I have the view that you want loads of small things, creating lots of ideas. And from those ideas, many things will crash and burn and disappear. But the next big things and the next great ideas and the next source of wealth will come from that. It feels a little bit like that's being strangled currently. So my concern is that that ends up with a slow death for wealth, and you end up with something that approximates feudalism in the Middle Ages in the UK, where a very few people in the US, you look at the court of Donald Trump and it almost seems like you've got the House of Musk appearing and the House of Teal, and it rhymes a little bit. So my concern is that we head back to that place where only a few people have any power and are creating any wealth. The best case is that we have, I guess, what you maybe saw in the 70s, which was we do get a burst of inflation. That, you know, people say that that's the way to solve the debt crisis, and I happen to agree with that. So maybe we have to go through something a bit horrible like the 70s were to reduce that down, to allow people to be able to buy houses again, to be able to start businesses, and then you get that wonderful growth. I always use the analogy of it being a bit like a garden or a flower bed in a garden. Sometimes you need to trim that thing back, and then you get the most explosive growth that follows after that. So my best case is that we have a few bad years of inflation, but the animal spirits then ignite because you get younger people able to start businesses and take risks and all of that wonderful stuff. So that's my hope.
No, and no meteors as well, so that's an upside as well.
Yeah,
so
we could avoid those. That would be great.
Although down in the basement here in our club, I think that's the one place that we survive the meteor hitting.
It might be I'm staying here.
Yeah, stay in the bunker. Just two more quick ones. What advice would you think you should have given your younger self, or would give your younger self? I
would say the same advice I'd give myself today, which I keep failing to take, which is enjoy the ride. I look back and I think, you know what, that was fun. I've met so many great people. We did really well. We've created some value. We've made some good products. But all the time I was doing it, I felt perhaps more stressed, and I felt like I didn't have enough time to get everything done that needed doing. With hindsight, obviously I did have enough time to get everything done that needed doing because everything happened and it worked and it all went swimmingly. But at the time, you just feel like, oh my God, I've got to do this and I could be doing more. And I'm absolutely back in that same hole again today, where I just feel like I could be doing X, I could be doing Y, I could be writing more, I could be speaking more, I could be meeting more advisors, we could be doing more with the funds. But they're doing just fine, you know, they're doing the job that we set out for them. So if I could just, you know, take my own advice that I would give myself 30 years ago, which would be chill out, enjoy it, and, you know, every now and again just take stock and think, you know, we've moved forward and we're not in a bad place.
Very good. We call this choice words videos. It's obviously the pun on fun picking and everything else, but picking a couple of personal recommendations. We normally look for a book. The other one's a complete free hit. So what would you go for?
Well, let's go with the book first of all. I've already mentioned it once, and it's fresh in my mind because I read it about 7 or 8 years ago, and I've just been re-listening to it, which I think is quite an interesting way to kind of revisit a great book because it gives you a different perspective on it. It's Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. I love that book. I think discussing what we were just discussing about growth, I think all politicians and regulators should be made to read this book because it's all about crazy ideas that shouldn't work, that do, and how we need to have a little bit more of just allowing people to have crazy ideas and giving them the ability to have them. Quite often these crazy ideas seem absolutely sensible in hindsight until someone's been mad enough to try them. You don't get them to happen. It's a fantastic read. It's wonderfully entertaining and well written.
Yeah,
so
he's absolutely brilliant. I think he's probably the person I've quoted most.
Yes,
because he has a column in the Spectator as the Wiki Man, and all those ideas seem so fresh.
He is. I think he's a genius. Yeah, I think he's someone I look up to a lot, and he is very refreshing. And I think he's the tonic that the world probably needs right now. The other thing I would recommend, so let's recommend a movie because I'm a movie buff, and it's one that I use quite a bit when I'm discussing The Heroic Journey, amongst other things, and that is, depending on whether you're watching this in the States or the UK, if you're watching this in the UK, it's called Le Mans 66. If you're watching this in the States, I think it's called Ford versus Ferrari.
Right.
Same movie, Matt Damon, Christian Bale. Again, why I love it is because I think it is hitting at something that a lot of advisors particularly will be struggling with at the moment, which is it's the story of someone who is excellent in their field and just wants to be the world's best racing driver. But to do that, he has to wrestle with the kind of corporate behemoth that is Ford. So it's about these two racing drivers, one current, one ex, trying to get Ford to do the right things in order to make a car that could possibly win Le Mans, and to let this guy drive it, who's a bit of a maverick kind of genius, but doesn't get on with corporate people very well. It's such a great story because I think you've got those two characters there, and it gives you one character in Christian Bale's form, who is just a complete rebel, but to the point where maybe he blows it up because he storms out of everywhere he works for and therefore ends up never actually becoming the best driver / fun manager because of that. And then you have Matt Damon's character, who is more of the pragmatist, who can see what's needed to be excellent, but also sees that you need to kind of be pragmatic and toe the line a little bit in order to get the big company to do the excellent thing. And so, yeah, it makes me kind of well up a little bit when I'm watching it. I shouldn't be crying a movie about two men driving cars, but I think it's absolutely playing to something that a lot of people are struggling with currently.
Well, this squares the circle nicely to finish on a nice analogy as well. I think that's done brilliantly. Simon, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for that.
Likewise, Julian, thank you.
And thank you all, he says optimistically, very much for watching. Do look out for further Choice Words videos as they come along.